The lot behind the warehouses in Kent was the kind of place nobody admitted they used. You found it when you were too tired to keep rolling and too broke to pay for anything nicer. Cracked asphalt, chain-link fence, a gate that never fully latched, and a couple of sodium lights that buzzed like they were mad about being awake. The drizzle didn't fall hard enough to call it rain, but it never stopped either. It just hung in the air and coated everything in a thin, cold film, like the whole city was sweating. I sat in my truck with the wipers on the lowest setting, listening to the rough idle stumble every few seconds. The motor wasn't dying, not yet, but it sounded like it was thinking about it. I could feel the vibration through the seat, through the steering wheel, through my forearms, quarter tank. The needle sat there like it was glued. I'd watched it drop to that spot earlier and told myself it was fine, because telling yourself it's fine is what you do when you can't afford the other answer. The other trucks in the lot were spaced out like strangers in an elevator. A sleeper with its running lights on. A reefer unit clicking on and off in the distance, slow as a heartbeat. A day cab parked crooked near the fence like whoever drove it didn't care if it got boxed in. No one was walking around. No one was laughing. The whole place felt paused, like we were all waiting for the same thing, and none of us wanted to name it. I pulled my phone out again, even though I'd already done it too many times to pretend it was productive. The screen lit up my hands and the bottom edge of the dash. My banking app loaded, the little spinning circle doing its routine. Then the number showed up, the same number it had shown me for 3 days straight, $1,247.13. I stared at it like I could pressure it into changing. I refreshed. Same thing. It wasn't even the amount that got under my skin. It was the 13 cents, like the universe had the nerve to be exact about how short I was. Not even a clean number. Not even a nice round kind of broke, just broke with spare change. My card had declined at the pump earlier. I knew it would, but I tried anyway. Twice. That second try was pure denial, like the machine might feel bad for me and let it through. It hadn't. I'd walked back to the cab with my jacket damp and my pride bruised, and I told myself I could make it through the night on what was left in the tank. I just had to be careful. I just had to be smart. Smart didn't pay bills. Smart didn't make brokers process payments faster. Smart didn't put money in your account when you needed it in the next few hours. I set the phone down for a second and rubbed my eyes with the heel of my hand. My fingertips felt gritty. My whole body felt like it was made of tight knots. The kind of tired that didn't come from one long day, but from weeks of carrying stress around like it was part of your load. I looked at the dash clock without meaning to. It read 1:12. I watched it because I didn't have anything else to watch. The minutes should have rolled on, clean and steady. Instead, it sat there for a beat too long. Not long enough to call it broken, just long enough to make my brain go quiet. Then it clicked forward to 1:13 like nothing happened. I told myself it was the truck. Old wiring, weak battery. A cheap display that was finally giving up after years of bouncing down interstates. I told myself that because the other option made my stomach tighten. The other option made it feel like something had noticed me. The radio was off. It had been off since I pulled in. I didn't need noise. I needed sleep. But the radio clicked on anyway, just for a few seconds, like someone had brushed a switch. There wasn't music. There wasn't a station. It was a low wash of static, but underneath it there was a rhythm that sounded almost like speech. Not words, just the shape of words, like a voice pushed through a wall. I froze with my hand hovering near the volume knob, listening hard, trying to decide if it was real or if my brain was making patterns out of nothing. The rhythm stuttered once, like it was correcting itself, then the radio clicked back off. The cab went quiet again, except for the engine and the wipers. I sat there with my hands on my thighs, staring at the dark windshield, and the lot felt a little less normal. Not in a dramatic way, Nothing jumped out. Nothing moved. But the air in the cab felt tighter, like the space had shrunk by an inch. Like I was sitting in a room with someone who wasn't talking. My phone buzzed. Not a call. A text. "Please don't make me beg about this again," Jessa texted. I didn't open it right away. I read it on the lock screen and let it sink in. Jessa didn't do drama. She didn't do speeches. If she was texting me like that, it meant she'd already burned through whatever patience she had left. I unlocked the phone and scrolled up through our thread, thumb moving on autopilot. Screenshots, payment portal. A line that said, "Deposit due." Another line that said appointment will be rescheduled if payment not received. It was all clean fonts and polite language for something that felt like a threat. Eli needed that deposit in by 9. That was the hard edge of it. 9 in the morning. Not tomorrow. Not next week. This morning. The kind of deadline you couldn't talk your way around because the clinic didn't care about your excuses. They cared about schedules. They cared about slots. They cared about the next family in line. I pictured Eli the way he looked last weekend, curled on the couch under a blanket that was too big for him. His cheeks were pale, his eyes were open, but you could tell he was tired even when he tried to smile. He'd held his inhaler in one hand like it was a toy and asked me if he was still going to get to go to school after the doctor fixed him. Like school was the important part, like he couldn't see the fear in the grown-ups' faces. I'd told him yes. I'd told him soon. I'd told him I'd handle it. Now I was sitting in a wet lot with a rough idol and a quarter tank and a bank balance that refused to move. I felt the familiar panic climb up my ribs, the kind that made you want to do something fast, anything, just to feel like you weren't trapped. I checked the time again. The dash clock read 1:13. It looked normal now, which somehow made it worse, like it was waiting for me to relax. I stared at the screen on my phone and refreshed my bank app one more time. Same number. I didn't even feel surprised. I felt tired. Tired in a way that made my hands feel heavy. Tired in a way that made the whole world feel like it was leaning on my shoulders. The phone rang. Unknown number. I hesitated, thumb hovering. I shouldn't have answered. It was 1 in the morning. No good call came from an unknown number at 1 in the morning. But I had rent on my back and my kids' lungs on my mind, and a deadline I couldn't dodge. I hit accept. "Yeah," I said. The phone was still warm in my hand from where I'd been doom-scrolling my own balance like it was going to change if I stared hard enough. The cab felt smaller at night, especially when you were broke. Every sound had room to echo. The rough idle, the wipers dragging, the faint buzz of the lot lights outside. Even my breathing sounded loud. The phone was still warm in my hand from where I'd been doom-scrolling my own balance like it was going to change if I stared hard enough. The cab felt smaller at night, especially when you were broke. Every sound had room to echo. The rough idle, the wipers dragging, the faint buzz of the lot lights outside. Even my breathing sounded loud. The screen still showed unknown, and my thumb was already on the answer button before I could talk myself out of it. The line stayed quiet for a beat after I said, "Yeah." No background noise, no truck rumble, no TV in the distance. Just a controlled silence that made my skin tighten like somebody had called from a place with no air. The line stayed quiet for a beat after I said hello. No background noise, no truck rumble, no TV in the distance. Just a controlled silence that made my skin tighten like somebody had called from a place with no air. "Carter Boone," Mara said flatly. Her voice hit like a name being read off a clipboard. I hadn't heard it in a while, but I remembered it. Mara wasn't friendly. She wasn't warm. She didn't do small talk. But when I'd run a couple loads for her back in 23, the money had landed fast. Same day. Not, "It's processing," not, "Check back tomorrow," not, "The accounting office is closed," just paid. That stuck with me, because in this business getting paid is the whole point, and most people forgot that the second you sign the rate confirmation. I sat up a little, Not because I trusted her, but because my body recognized a chance. My pulse picked up, then immediately fought itself. Hope and suspicion at the same time, like two dogs on the same leash. "Make it quick, Mara," I said. I kept my eyes on the windshield, on the wet light outside. I didn't like looking around when I felt cornered. Looking around made it feel like there was somewhere to go, and there wasn't. I was in a truck I couldn't afford to fuel, parked in a lot that smelled like diesel and damp concrete, waiting on a payment that wasn't coming in time. Mara didn't ask how I was doing. She didn't ask where I'd been. She didn't pretend we had history. The only history we had was numbers. 2,000. Cash. Tonight, she said. 2,000 cash. My brain grabbed the number first, turned it over, tried to see the edges. 2,000 didn't solve the whole mess, but it changed the morning. It turned 9 a.m. from a cliff into a steep hill. It gave me a shot at keeping the schedule, at keeping Eli where he needed to be, at walking into that clinic with something in my hand besides excuses. It also didn't make sense. Cash was rare. Cash meant somebody didn't want a paper trail, or somebody didn't want delays, or somebody didn't want anyone else involved. Cash meant urgency, and urgency at 1 a.m. usually came with trouble. I felt my thumb rub the edge of my phone case without meaning to, a nervous habit. I wanted to ask what the job was. I wanted to ask why she was calling me. I wanted to ask what circulation even meant in her mouth, because I'd heard drivers use that word like a joke, like a rumor. I didn't ask any of it, because she'd said cash, and she'd said tonight, and all I could see was Eli's face and that deadline sitting on Jess's screen like a countdown clock. "Where is it?" I asked. Even as I said it, I could hear how desperate it sounded, and I hated that. I hated needing anything from anyone. I hated how the road had trained me to swallow questions when money was waved in front of my face. But I didn't have time to posture. I didn't have time to pretend I wasn't a guy with a quarter tank and a kid who needed surgery. Strander Boulevard, behind the furniture outlet, white Sprinter, hazards on, she told me. Strander Boulevard, Tukwila. I knew that strip. Big commercial lots, back entrances, loading bays, and shadowy pockets where streetlights didn't reach. A furniture outlet behind a chain-link fence, banners in the windows, cheap couches stacked under fluorescent light. Behind it would be service lanes and dumpsters and that dead space where people did things they didn't want seen. White Sprinter, hazards on. That was a meet, not a dispatch, not a normal pickup. That was a handoff. My stomach tightened, but my hands didn't move away from the wheel. I stared at the wiper sweep and tried to picture the next hour like it was already decided. I thought about the last time I said no to a shady load. I'd said no and then spent 3 weeks eating gas station food and sleeping in my truck because I couldn't afford a hotel, waiting on something better. Something better didn't show up. Something better never shows up when you're the one who needs it. I thought about telling Jessa I couldn't do it. I pictured her face, not angry, just done. Like a person hearing the same excuse so many times it stopped sounding like language. I checked the fuel needle again, still quarter. The engine stumbled once, then caught. The cab smelled like damp fabric and stale coffee. My mouth tasted like I'd been chewing pennies. I didn't pray. I'm not that guy. I didn't ask the universe for help. The universe doesn't take calls. The universe just keeps time. 9 a.m. That was the only thing that mattered. Not what this job was. Not why it paid cash. Not why Mara sounded like she was reading lines off a script. Not why she'd called me out of the blue like she'd been waiting for me to hit a certain level of desperate. I wasn't making a choice between good and bad. I was making a choice between bad and worse. "I'm on my way," I said. The line went dead right after. No goodbye, no warning, no last-minute detail. It cut clean, like a switch flipped. I stared at the call screen, waiting for the number to appear, waiting for anything that made it feel normal. It didn't. Just unknown, like a blank face. I set the phone down slow. I sat there for a second with both hands on the wheel, listening to the rough idle and the wipers and the buzz of the lot lights, letting the decision settle into my bones. Then I put the truck in gear and rolled out. Strander Boulevard looked different at night. In the daytime it was ugly but familiar, a line of big stores and service roads and people making bad turns in the rain. At 2 a.m, it felt like a set somebody forgot to take down. The furniture outlet sat dark and sealed, its banner signs barely moving in the wind. The back lot was a wide slab of wet asphalt, bordered by chain link and blackberry vines, and the street lights didn't so much light the place as smear it into yellow patches. I drove behind the building like Mara said and kept my speed slow, tires hissing over puddles. The drizzle had turned the world glossy. Every painted line on the ground shined. Every reflector looked sharper than it should have. My headlights cut through the mist and hit the corner where the service lane ended. The white Sprinter was there. It was parked under a light that flickered like it was dying. On, off, on again. Each time it went dark, the van disappeared into the background. Each time it came back, the van reappeared like someone had hit a reset button. Its hazard lights were on, blinking steady, the only thing about it that felt normal. I pulled in and stopped a few yards away. I didn't kill the engine. I didn't even put the window down at first. I just sat with both hands on the wheel, watching. The air in the lot had that damp gas smell you only get around service roads. Wet concrete, fuel, old trash. Somewhere nearby, a dumpster lid banged once and then went quiet again. The rest was nothing. No traffic, no voices, no music leaking from a building. Just my idle and the blink of those hazards. I glanced at my phone. No service. Not even a single bar flickering in and out. That bugged me more than it should have. This wasn't the woods. This wasn't a dead zone in the mountains. This was 10 minutes from major highways and an airport. My phone should have been lit up with towers. I pocketed it without thinking too hard about it. The less I stared at that missing signal, the easier it was to pretend this was just an unusual pickup and not a bad idea wrapped in money. I waited for someone to step out of the van, a driver, a loader, anybody. Nothing happened. Then a figure moved in the edge of my headlights. A man stepped out from the deeper shadow near the fence, not from the van, not from the building, just from the dark space between. He walked like he didn't want to be here, shoulders hunched, hands tucked into his jacket pockets, hood up, face mostly hidden. He didn't come close. He stopped where my light hit him and stayed there like the beam was a boundary. "You Carter Boone?" a man asked. "Yeah," I said. He held up a manila envelope. Clean, flat, like it hadn't been sitting in the rain. He didn't offer it with a handshake or any normal gesture. He pinched it by the corner like it was something he didn't want on his skin. "Read it. Decide fast," he said. I cracked my window just a couple of inches and leaned across the cab to get a better look. The envelope had my name printed on it in neat block letters, not written, printed. That was the first thing that made my stomach tighten. I reached out with 2 fingers and took it. The paper felt cool and dry. "What is this?" I asked. The man's head turned slightly, like he was listening to something behind him, something I couldn't hear. For a second, I thought he might answer me like a normal person, like there was a company name, a customer, a reason. "Not my job," he muttered. Then he backed away, quick and quiet, and the flickering streetlight went dark for a beat. When it came back on, he was gone. No van door opened. No engine started. The hazards kept blinking like nothing happened. I sat there with the envelope in my lap, the cab light off, the only glow coming from my dash. I didn't like how clean the envelope was. I didn't like how the man looked like he'd been sent to drop something and vanish. I didn't like how my phone had no signal, like the world had been cut off at the edges. But I tore the envelope open anyway. Something heavy slid out into my palm and made a dull sound when it hit the plastic trim of the cup holder. A coin. Not a quarter, not a token from a car wash. A thick black coin, heavier than it should have been, cold enough that my skin reacted. One side had a raised number stamped into it, 17. The other side was smooth, blank, like it didn't care who held it. I set it in the cup holder and unfolded the paper that came with it. No logo, no letterhead, just a list. 7 lines, each one short, each one written like it belonged in a training manual. I read them once, then again, slower, the way you read something that might be a joke until you realize nobody is laughing. Don't shut the engine off until it's done. Keep it between 52 and 58 on the freeway. Don't leave the loop they give you. No shortcuts, no detours. If the AM radio turns on by itself, listen for 17 seconds. Don't talk back. If you see the same billboard or sign 3 times, get into the left lane and stay there for 90 seconds. If you hear knocking anywhere in the truck, knock back once on the steering wheel. Be at the anchor point at 5:17 on the dot, not early, not late. When it turns 5:17, put the token on the dash and don't step out. That was it. No address, no freight description, no mention of a trailer, no signature line. Just rules. They weren't written like warnings. They weren't written like someone trying to scare you for fun. They were written like procedure, like the kind of thing a safety guy would hand you before a run and tell you to follow it because people get hurt when they don't. Except none of this was safety. Not the kind I knew. 52 to 58 wasn't a normal instruction, not on a freeway. 17 seconds, 90 seconds. 5:17 on the dot. Those weren't suggestions. Those were marks on a ruler. I looked at the coin again. 17 staring up at me like an eye. I tried to laugh and couldn't. My throat felt tight. My hands felt too big for the wheel, like my body was suddenly aware of itself in a way it shouldn't be. I glanced at my phone again. Still no service. I didn't even try to call Mara. The idea felt stupid, like calling the person who handed you a match after your house caught fire. I looked at the van. Hazards blinking. No movement inside, no silhouette, just a white shape under a flickering light, sitting there like it wasn't part of anything. The smart move was to leave. Drive away. Pretend this never happened. Go find a safer way to fail. Because that's what it was. If I didn't take this, I wasn't choosing safety. I was choosing a different kind of disaster. I was choosing to show up at 9 a.m. with nothing, to watch Jess's face shut down, to watch a receptionist say rescheduled like it was weather. I thought about Eli's breathing, that thin wheeze he tried to hide when he talked too much, the way he slept on his side because it made his chest feel better, the way he asked if I was still going to be there when he woke up. I thought about Jess's text. Please don't make me beg. Like she'd already begged enough for a lifetime. I didn't want to be here. I didn't want to be the kind of man who took weird instructions from a stranger behind a furniture outlet. I didn't want my kids' health to depend on a job that felt like a dare. But I also didn't have time to want things. I folded the paper carefully, not because I respected it, but because my hands needed something to do. I slid it into the visor above my head. I picked up the coin again and felt how cold it still was, cold like it didn't care about the warmth of my palm. I stared at the stamped number, 17. Then I closed my fist around it and held it there until my knuckles went pale. I didn't say yes out loud. There was nobody there to hear it. I just put the truck in gear and pulled away from the van, back toward the main road, with the rules sitting above my head like a weight and the coin in my pocket like a decision I couldn't take back. I hit the on-ramp and let the truck pull me up into the flow like it had done 1,000 times. SR 167 was mostly empty at that hour, just a handful of headlights in the distance and a few semis hauling quiet loads toward places that never slept. The drizzle stayed light but steady, the kind that didn't soak you all at once. It just kept working until everything was damp. The pavement shined under my headlights, lane lines bright like they'd been freshly painted, reflectors popping in that clean, wet way that made the road look sharper than it really was. I brought the speed up slow and watched the needle like it mattered. 52, 54, 56. I held it there, not because I felt like it, but because the paper in my visor had told me to. Keeping it between 52 and 58 felt simple on its face, like a dumb little rule you'd give a rookie. But it also felt like a leash, like if I let it drift to 60, something would notice. I didn't have a destination in the normal sense. No dock number, no receiver name, no appointment time in a system, just a loop. Just a pattern I was supposed to stay inside. Every time I even thought about taking a different ramp, the road ahead seemed to make the choice for me, nudging me back like there was only one corridor I was allowed to use. My phone sat in the cup holder, dark, useless, no bars. I glanced at it once, then forced myself to stop. Watching it made my chest tighten. It made me want to reach out to someone, to make this real by telling another human being what I was doing. But there wasn't anyone to tell who wouldn't either laugh or panic, and neither one helped. The truck rode smooth for a few miles. The engine still had that rough idle back in the lot, but under load it sounded better, like it was happier moving than sitting. That made me think of my own brain, and I didn't like that either. I merged onto I-405 and stayed in the middle lane, holding 56. The freeway curved through dark trees and wet concrete walls. Overhead, signs glowed green and clean. Bellevue, Renton, Bothell, names that normally meant nothing. Tonight they felt like markers on a board game. I kept checking my mirrors without meaning to. Nothing behind me but the wet shine of road and a distant set of headlights. Nothing alongside. The kind of quiet that should have been calming. Then the AM radio clicked on. Not a hiss fading in. Not a knob turning. A hard click, like a relay snapping shut. The sound made my scalp tighten. The radio was off. I knew it was off because I'd left it off. I didn't drive with AM. I didn't drive with talk radio, not at night, not when my mind was already loud. Static washed into the cab, low and steady. Under it there was a shape to the noise, almost like breath. The rule slid into my head without me reaching for it. Listen for 17 seconds. Don't talk back. I glanced at the dash clock, then immediately looked away. I didn't trust it. I didn't trust anything that could lie with a straight face. So I counted in my head. Steady, like counting could anchor me. 1, 2, 3. The static thickened, then thinned. At around 5, there was a tone that sounded like a mic opening somewhere far away. At 7, the sound shifted again, like someone clearing their throat without having a throat. I kept counting. I kept my mouth shut. My jaw wanted to move anyway. That's what got me, the urge. Like my brain thought this was a normal call-in show and it was my job to answer when my name came up. Around 10 seconds in, the static broke into a clipped cadence. Not words, not yet, but the rhythm of someone used to talking into a headset. Dispatchers have a way of speaking that's half automation, half control. They compress sentences, they cut corners, they make everything sound like it's already decided. At 12, a half-phrase surfaced, as if someone had started talking mid-sentence. Copy, confirm. Then it slipped back under the static like it hadn't been there. At 14, my name hit the speaker. Carter. But it wasn't my name the way Mara said it. It wasn't my name the way Jessa said it. It was close, but wrong on the edges, like it was being read by someone who'd never met me and didn't care to get it right. The stress was off. The timing was off. The syllables landed in the wrong places. My hands tightened on the wheel. I felt it in my forearms. My shoulders locked up like I was bracing for impact. 16, 17. I reached over and turned the radio off. The click sounded final. Not like I'd stopped a station, like I'd closed a latch. The cab went quiet again, but the quiet didn't feel empty. It felt held, like the sound had been removed on purpose, leaving space behind. I drove another mile, trying to act normal, trying to breathe like I wasn't counting rules in my head. The drizzle kept tapping the windshield. Tires hissed. The wet road reflected the light back at me in long, pale streaks. Then the knocking started. It wasn't loud. It wasn't the kind of knock you'd hear if something in the cab was loose and rattling. It had a rhythm, not a steady rhythm, but a deliberate one. Tap, tap, pause, tap. It came from somewhere inside the cab, but I couldn't pin it down. Roof, dash, sleeper wall, it didn't matter. The sound was close enough that my skin prickled. For a second, my mind tried to make it mechanical. A panel shifting, a vent flap, a wire harness tapping, anything that didn't have intention. Then the rule surfaced again. If you hear knocking anywhere in the truck, knock back once on the steering wheel. My right hand lifted off the wheel like it didn't belong to me. I didn't want to do it. Doing it felt like answering, like confirming I was here, I was listening, I was playing. But the knock came again, patient, like it knew I was hesitating. Tap, tap. I brought my knuckles down once on the steering wheel. One clean knock, not hard, not soft, just enough to be unmistakable. The knocking stopped instantly. No fade, no lingering echo, just gone. I kept my hand on the wheel and waited. My pulse thudded in my throat. I listened for anything else, for a second knock, for the sound moving deeper, for the cab to creak, for the radio to click back on. Nothing. The silence that followed wasn't relief. It felt like a response, like the thing that had knocked had gotten what it wanted and didn't need to keep asking. I held 56 and stared at the lane lines like they were the only real thing left. The wet pavement shimmered. The reflectors snapped by in clean little flashes. The freeway signs drifted overhead like they were watching too. And all I could think was how fast the sound had stopped and how wrong it felt that it stopped because I did what the paper told me to do. And not because the noise had ended, because I'd been accepted. Traffic built up the way it always did when the night started handing things off to morning. It wasn't rush hour yet, not the full mess, but there were more headlights now, more cars moving with that half-awake impatience. Work vans, a couple ride shares, a box truck cruising like it owned the lane, everybody going somewhere on a schedule that didn't care about weather or fatigue. I stayed between 52 and 58 like the rules said, holding 56 as clean as I could. It felt slow compared to the flow, slow enough that people started to stack behind me, then swing around. I could feel the pressure of it even when nobody was right on my bumper. It was the way cars drifted closer, the way headlights sat in my mirrors, a beat too long before sliding past like they were measuring me. The drizzle kept everything reflective. The road looked slicker than it was, tail lights smeared into red ribbons on the wet pavement. The overhead signs glowed green and sterile. I kept my hands fixed on the wheel and tried not to think about how stupid it was, taking traffic instructions from a piece of paper handed to me behind a furniture outlet. Then I saw the billboard, big, bright on the right side, a lawyer ad, smiling face in a suit, white teeth, a phone number so large you could read it from a mile away. It flashed by and I didn't care, not at first. Billboards are just noise. You see them and forget them. That's the deal. 10 minutes later, the same billboard showed up again. Same smiling suit, same phone number, same tiny slogan under it that I still couldn't have quoted if you put a gun to my head. For a second, my brain tried to make it normal. Same company buys multiple spots. That happens. They plaster the same ad all over a corridor because repetition works. But it sat wrong in my stomach anyway, because the freeway had curved and risen and dropped. I had passed exits. I'd moved through miles. Seeing the exact same sign twice felt like a glitch you weren't supposed to notice. I didn't say anything. I didn't touch the radio. I just kept the truck steady and watched the right shoulder like it might explain itself. The sedan showed up around then. Dark color, maybe black, maybe a deep gray that looked black in the wet. It settled behind me at a clean distance and stayed there. Not tailgating, not hanging way back, just there, matching my speed like it had synced to me. At first I assumed it was just a commuter, somebody half asleep cruising behind a truck because it felt safe. People do that. They lock onto your taillights and let you do the thinking. But it didn't drift. It didn't change lanes when a gap opened. It didn't pass me even when the left lane cleared. It didn't fall back when traffic thickened. It held position like a drone. I checked my mirrors more than I wanted to. The sedan stayed centered. Its headlights didn't bounce with the road the way most cars' lights do. They stayed level, like the suspension was too smooth, or the driver was too careful. I couldn't see the driver. The windshield was just a dark sheet. No glow from a dashboard, no phone light, nothing. My chest got tight in that old familiar way, the way it does when you realize you're being watched and you can't prove it, so you feel crazy for reacting. The billboard came again. Third time. Same smile, same number. Same bright face cutting through the drizzle like it owned the night. The moment I saw it, my stomach dropped. I didn't need to reach for the paper to remember the rule. It was already carved into my head. If you see the same billboard or sign 3 times, get into the left lane and stay there for 90 seconds. I checked my left mirror. A white SUV was coming up, but it was still a few car lengths back. I signaled early, slow, and deliberate, and eased over the second I had room. "Left lane," I said. Saying it out loud made it feel real. It also made my mouth go dry, like the cab didn't want me naming what I was doing. I held the left lane. 56. Hands steady, eyes forward. I started counting 90 seconds in my head. I didn't look at the dash clock. I didn't trust it. I counted the way you count when you're trying not to panic, slow and strict. 10, 20, 30. The sedan followed me into the left lane the second I moved, still at that same clean distance. It didn't hesitate. It didn't get caught behind anyone. It just came with me, like it had been waiting for the lane change. At around 40 seconds, the traffic in the middle lane tightened. A pickup moved up next to a box truck. A work van slid into a gap that wasn't really a gap. Brake lights started popping, small clusters at first, then a wave. I kept my speed steady. I stayed left like the rule said. At around 60 seconds, it happened. In the lane I had been in, the one I'd left, a car braked hard for no reason I could see. Maybe someone checked their phone. Maybe someone thought an exit was coming up. It didn't matter. Their brake lights flared bright and sudden, and the cars behind them reacted like a chain snapping. A compact car swerved right into the middle lane to avoid the stop and nearly clipped the front corner of the box truck. The box truck jerked left in response, crossing the line into the space where my truck would have been. If I'd stayed in that lane, my hood would have been right there, my left mirror, my steer tire, the part of the truck that couldn't move out of the way fast enough. For a split second, the box truck's trailer drifted even farther left, the rear swinging like it was about to sideswipe the next vehicle, and then the driver corrected hard. The trailer snapped back and wobbled, tires through mist. A horn blared somewhere in the mess, long and angry. I watched it unfold from the left lane like I was watching an accident in slow motion. Everything too close, everything too fast. The kind of mess that happens all the time, except this one felt aimed. It felt like the road itself had set it up, then waited to see where I'd be standing when it fell. My hands were tight on the wheel. My jaw ached from clenching. I didn't breathe until the wave of brake lights settled and the lane smoothed out again. 90 seconds hit. I didn't move immediately. I held the lane an extra beat because my body didn't trust the idea of going back, not after what I just watched. Then I eased back toward the middle when I had space, careful, slow. The sedan stayed with me again, sliding into the same position behind my bumper like it belonged there. I tried not to look at it. Looking made it worse. Looking felt like acknowledging it. Then The AM radio clicked on. The sound punched straight through my spine. Static flooded the cab low and thick. I started counting immediately because that's what the rules did to you. They made you move without thinking. 1, 2, 3. No cadence this time, no half phrases, no breath, just static that held steady like a held note. At around 12 seconds, the static dipped and a single word came through, clean, quiet, close. Good, a voice said quietly. 17. I reached over and shut the radio off. The click sounded satisfied, almost gentle, like a pat on the shoulder you didn't ask for. I kept driving. 56, wet road, more traffic, normal things. But nothing felt normal anymore, because the lane I left had turned into a crash without a reason, and the only thing between me and it had been a rule on a piece of paper that shouldn't have meant anything. And somewhere behind me, that sedan stayed locked in place, steady as a heartbeat, like it was keeping time for something I hadn't agreed to. The patrol lights hit my mirrors like a punch, blue and red, sharp even through the drizzle, bouncing off the wet pavement behind me. For half a second, my brain tried to treat it like any other stop. Signal, ease over, hands on the wheel, be polite, hope it's a warning. That muscle memory runs deep. It's the kind of thing you don't even decide. Your body just starts doing it. Then the reality of what I was doing snapped back in. Rule 3. Don't leave the loop they give you. No shortcuts, no detours. Pulling over was a detour, even if it was 10 feet, even if it was legal, even if it was the smart thing. The rule didn't care. The rule didn't say, unless a cop tells you to. It just said, don't. My throat went dry. My hands started to sweat against the wheel. The cruiser closed the distance, lights still spinning, and a bright spotlight swung across my mirrors, then across the back of my cab like it was looking for something. I could feel the beam more than I could see it, a hard white glare that made everything inside my truck feel exposed. The sedan that had been following me was gone. I checked both mirrors quick, saw nothing but wet road and the wash of police lights. The siren chirped once, then stayed quiet. The officer didn't want to wake the whole freeway. They just wanted me. A hand gesture appeared in my mirror, that universal wave toward the shoulder. Get over, now. My right foot twitched. My body wanted to comply. My brain screamed not to. I felt split in half. One part of me was a driver who knew you don't ignore lights. The other part of me was a father counting down to 9 a.m. with a coin in his pocket and a set of rules hanging over his head like a hook. I kept my speed at 56. I held my lane. The patrol car stayed behind me, lights flashing, close enough now that I could see the shape of the push bar and the outline of a person behind the windshield. I couldn't see a face. Just a dark silhouette in that harsh strobe of blue and red. My heart slammed hard enough to hurt. The rain smelled sharper, like cold metal. I could hear my own breathing over the engine. If I pulled over, I broke the pattern. If I didn't pull over, I was running from a cop. Either way, I was the guy making a choice that was going to haunt him. A bright sign appeared ahead on the right, a gas station canopy glowing like a stadium. Harsh white lights, clean edges, everything under it blown out and obvious. The brightest place in range, the kind of place where cameras watched every angle and people moved around like witnesses. I didn't decide so much as drift toward it, not to stop, not to fuel, just to get into the light, just to get somewhere that felt like the rules couldn't swallow me whole. I took the exit smooth and steady, no sudden braking, no panic swerve. I kept the truck controlled like I was doing this on purpose, like I wasn't shaking. The patrol car didn't follow. That was worse. The lights disappeared up the freeway like whoever was behind them had gotten what they wanted just by making me face the choice. Like the stop itself had been the point. I rolled into the station lot and the world snapped into normal noises. Air compressors, a diesel pump clunking. The faint beep of a crosswalk signal at the corner, the smell of burnt coffee drifting out every time the glass doors opened. 2 semis were parked near the diesel island, engines running. A couple of regular cars sat by the entrance with their headlights still on. It should have been comforting. It wasn't. I drove past the pumps and tucked into a spot along the edge, under the brightest light I could find. The rain turned into tiny beads on the windshield and roof. The canopy lights made the drops look like static. I kept the engine running. I didn't unbuckle. I didn't move for a second. I just sat there with my hands on the wheel like I was waiting for someone to tell me what to do next. That's when I noticed the guy in the reflective vest. He was standing near the corner of the building, not leaning, not smoking, not scrolling his phone. Just standing still, staring straight at my truck. His hood was up, but I could see his face when the door lights flared. Young, pale, sharp features, eyes that looked too awake for this hour. He didn't look curious. He looked like he'd been expecting me. I watched him for a beat, then forced myself to look away, like staring back would count as an invitation. My phone sat in the cup holder, still showing no service. I could feel the coin in my pocket like a cold weight. I told myself I was here for 30 seconds, just to reset, just to breathe, then back on the loop. The guy started walking toward me, not fast, not slow, just direct, like a worker called to a problem, like this was his shift and I was his assignment. He stopped at my driver's side window, close enough that I could see rain on his eyelashes. His vest caught the canopy light and flashed bright. "You can't park here long," Noah said. I didn't ask how he knew my name was Carter, because he didn't say Carter, but hearing him speak made something in my chest tighten anyway. His voice was calm, almost bored, like he'd said that line 100 times tonight. "I'm not parking," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. I kept my eyes on his chin instead of his eyes. Looking people in the eyes felt too personal right now, like it could bind you to them. Noah's gaze flicked past me into the cab, then down toward the cup holder, then back up, like he was taking inventory, like he was checking whether I'd brought what I was supposed to bring. "Good," he muttered. A cold little relief passed through me, then immediately soured. I didn't want his approval. I didn't want to be doing anything that earned a good from a stranger at a gas station at 3 a.m. Noah leaned in slightly, lowering his voice without making a show of it. "People who park get picked up," he said quietly. My stomach dropped. The words were plain, but they landed heavy. Picked up, not towed, not arrested, not asked to move. Picked up like a package. I swallowed and tried to keep my face blank. If I reacted, if I asked questions, it felt like it would make it more real. It felt like it would anchor the idea in the air between us. The phone buzzed in the cup holder, hard enough that it rattled against the plastic. I looked down without meaning to. A text from an unknown number, even though I had no service. The screen glowed bright against the dark cab. The message was short. "Rocket, turn around," the text said. My heart stopped for a beat, then started again too fast. Rocket was Eli's nickname for me. He'd been calling me that since he was little. He'd made it up on his own, because I used to tell him I wanted to be an astronaut when I was a kid. Nobody else used it. Not Jessa, not my friends, not anyone on the road. It was ours. My fingers went numb around the wheel. Noah watched my face like he could see the message reflected in my eyes. He didn't ask what it said. He didn't need to. His expression didn't change at all, which scared me more than if he'd looked surprised. My brain raced through possible explanations. Jessa didn't know that nickname. Even if she did, she didn't text like this. Eli didn't have my number on his own phone. Nobody in the clinic had it. Nobody in my life used it except a 7-year-old kid who thought I was strong. I stared at the message until my vision blurred. Then I locked the phone and flipped it face down like that could erase it. I looked back at Noah. Rain slid down his hood in slow streams. His mouth stayed neutral. His eyes stayed fixed, not on me exactly, but on the space around me, like he was monitoring something. The smell of coffee drifted out as the store doors opened behind him. A guy walked past carrying a fountain drink. A woman laughed at something on her phone. Normal life moved 2 feet away like it didn't know what was happening right here. I felt exposed under the canopy lights. I felt like I was standing on a stage. If I fueled, I'd be staying. If I stayed, I'd be parking. If I parked, Noah had just told me what happened. I didn't argue with the logic. I didn't even give myself time to debate it. I eased the truck forward, rolling past the pumps without stopping. My hands were shaking, but the motion made me feel less trapped. Motion meant I still had control. Noah stepped back from the window as I moved, like he'd expected it, like he'd been there to make sure I didn't do the wrong thing. I drove toward the exit and looked in the mirror one time. Noah stood under the harsh white light, still and watching, his reflective vest bright as a warning sign. He didn't wave. He didn't call after me. He just stared, like he was timing me. I merged back onto the ramp and returned to the freeway, keeping my speed in the range, staying inside the loop with the phone face down in the cup holder and Eli's nickname burning in my head like a brand. Because if something out there could call me Rocket, it wasn't just watching the road, it was watching my life. Bellevue came up on me too fast. The miles blurred together after I left that gas station, like the freeway decided to stop being a place and start being a chute. I kept the speed where the rules wanted it, felt the truck hum steady under me, watched the wet lanes slide by in clean white lines that looked almost painted onto glass. My hands were sore from gripping the wheel. My jaw ached. Every time I blinked, I had that half-second fear that I'd open my eyes and be somewhere else. I started checking the dash clock again, even though I didn't want to. I'd sworn I wouldn't trust it, but time was the whole trap now. Time and precision. The kind of precision nobody in trucking ever asked for, because traffic and weather and human bodies don't run like machines. But the rules didn't care about that. The rules assumed the road would cooperate. The clock said it was early. Too early. I could do the math in my head without trying. The loop had carried me here faster than it should have. Like the freeway had cut corners for me. Like it wanted me to arrive with time to spare. And then the dash clock did that thing again. It didn't jump backward. It didn't flash. It just hesitated. A small hang in the digits like a breath caught in someone's throat. Then it continued as if nothing happened. That tiny pause made my skin prickle. I told myself it was the truck, bad wiring, cheap display, rain in the wrong place. I told myself that because I needed something to blame that wasn't watching. My phone stayed face down in the cup holder. I didn't want to see it. I didn't want another text calling me Rocket, proving it could reach into my life whenever it wanted. I didn't want to know what else it knew. The exits and signs started to look familiar in that way they do when you've driven a route a dozen times. Except I hadn't. Not like this. Not at this hour, not under these rules. But the overhead signage had a sameness to it, and the drizzle made everything glow. A green sign. A white sign. A ramp splitting off. A concrete wall. Another green sign. The freeway spit me toward surface streets with the kind of ease that felt guided. Turn here. Merge here. Stay inside the loop. It was all too smooth, like I was being pulled along a track. When I first saw the place that had to be the anchor point, my stomach tightened. It wasn't a warehouse dock or a normal pickup zone. It was a dead corner tucked under an overpass, one of those odd patches of city you only see when you miss an exit. A strip of wet asphalt with a faded curb, a chain-link fence, and a small concrete pad like somebody had planned to build something there and quit. A single pole light stood over it, bright enough to make the rain look like silver threads. The rest of the block was dark. I rolled past it once, slow, just to confirm. No people, no vehicles, no movement. That should have been relief. Instead, it felt staged. Like an empty room with chairs set up, like a place waiting for the right time to become something else. I checked the dash clock again, and my chest dropped when I saw it. Still early. Not dangerously early, but early enough to make the rules feel like they were tightening around my throat. I couldn't be there early. Not if the voice was right. Not if Noah was right. Not if anything about this made sense in its own twisted way. I drove one more block, then turned, keeping it smooth, keeping my hands steady even though they were shaking. I tried to find something normal to hold on to, a street sign, a parked car, a building with a light on, anything. That's when the clock hit 5:12. 5:12, I said. The words came out like I was confirming a code to myself. 5:12. The window. The start of the only safe space I had left, because if I arrived too early, it would be noticed, and I didn't want to learn what noticed meant. I took a breath and made a decision that felt stupid and careful at the same time. One loop, I said. I turned the truck onto the next street and started circling the block. One clean loop, not two, not three, not a casual drive around. One. The rules didn't say to do this, not directly, but the whole night had taught me one thing. Patterns mattered, timing mattered, anything sloppy got punished. The first pass felt normal enough. Wet pavement, orange street lights, a few parked cars along the curb, a storefront with its lights off, a bus stop bench slick with rain, the overpass looming above everything like a low ceiling. Then I came back around. A man in a rain jacket stood on the corner near the fence, hood up, hands in his pockets. I hadn't noticed him on the first pass. Maybe I'd missed him. Maybe he'd stepped out from somewhere. My eyes tracked him without wanting to. He didn't turn his head as I rolled by. He just stood there facing the street like he was waiting for a bus that would never come. I took the next turn, and the radio clicked once, a small relay sound. The AM band didn't turn on, not fully. Just a click, like a finger tapping glass. I kept driving. The second pass brought me back to the same corner. The rain jacket guy was still there, same posture, same angle, like somebody had placed him in the scene and forgotten to animate him. A sedan was parked one car length farther up than it should have been, its tires turned slightly toward the curb. I could swear it hadn't been there before. Or maybe it had. The rain made everything look the same. A street sign caught my headlights. The letters looked crisp for a beat. Then my eyes slid off them like my brain refused to hold on to the detail. I tried to read it anyway, and couldn't. That scared me more than the knocking had. My mind didn't do that, not usually. I came around again, and it wasn't that everything was identical. It was worse. It was nearly identical, like a copy that was good enough to fool you unless you stared too hard. Like a scene being rendered in real time with small mistakes nobody expected a person to notice at 2 a.m. The same rain jacket, the same stillness, the same curb line, the same pole light over the concrete pad near the fence, the same patch of wet asphalt shining like black glass. I kept my speed low, controlled. I didn't stop. I didn't pull over. I didn't step out. I stayed inside the loop and let the clock pull me forward minute by minute like a hook. When I was close, when my gut told me I was about a minute out from 5:17, I saw him. He was standing right where the concrete pad met the curb under the bright pole light. Not pacing, not shifting his weight, just standing with his hands at his sides like he was part of the infrastructure. He wore a dark coat that looked too clean for the rain. His hair was neat. His face was pale and calm, the kind of calm that didn't come from confidence, it came from certainty. He looked up as my headlights hit him, and his eyes didn't squint. He didn't flinch. He looked straight at me like he'd been watching my approach through the rain. "Carter Boone," Mr. Sable said flatly. I eased the truck forward and stopped where the pad opened up, right on the line between street and lot, like he'd planned the exact position. My hands were still on the wheel. The coin in my pocket felt heavier now, like it wanted out. "You almost missed it," he said flatly. I stared at him through the windshield. The rain streaked down the glass in thin lines. The wipers swept and cleared a slice, then the rain filled it again. Everything about him stayed sharp. The clock rolled over to 5:17 and my stomach dropped. I didn't step out. I just put the token on the dash and kept my hands where he could see them. The black coin sat there under the dash light, the stamped number catching a dull shine. 17. A marker. A proof. A little piece of weight saying I'd done what I was told. Mr. Sable's gaze flicked to the coin, then back to my face. He gave a small nod, almost nothing, like he'd checked a box. "I'm on time," I said. He didn't smile, he didn't soften, he didn't react the way a human reacts when a person says something with fear in it. "Time is what you're being tested on," he said flatly. My throat felt tight. I could hear my own pulse in my ears. The city around us stayed quiet in that weird early morning way, like even the streetlights were holding their breath. No traffic passed, no sirens in the distance, no footsteps, just rain and the hum of my running engine. I swallowed and forced the next words out. "Where's the cash?" I asked. Mr. Sable leaned slightly forward, close enough that I could see rain beating on the shoulders of his coat, but not close enough to feel normal. He kept his eyes on mine like that was part of the test, too, watching whether I'd break. "You'll find it," he said flatly. Then he stepped back, one smooth step into the edge of my headlights, and for a second, the rain and the glare made him look thinner than he should have. Not ghostly, not supernatural in a dramatic way, just wrong at the edges, like a person rendered without enough detail. I didn't move. I didn't ask another question. My body understood something my brain didn't want to accept. This wasn't a negotiation. It wasn't a job in the way I knew jobs. It was a procedure, a checkpoint, an audit. The coin sat on the dash like a receipt. I stared at the coin on the dash and listened to the wipers, telling myself the next part would show up like everything else had, without asking. I sat there for a few breaths after Sable stepped back, waiting for something obvious to happen. A door to open, a hand to wave me in, a van to roll up, anything that made this feel like a transaction instead of a checkpoint. Nothing happened. Rain stitched down through the light. The engine idled steady. The coin sat on the dash like it belonged there, black and dull and patient. I kept my hands on the wheel a few seconds longer, then finally moved, slow and careful, like any sudden motion might count as the wrong answer. I eased the truck forward, rolled past the concrete pad, and took the corner at the end of the block. I didn't see Sable in the mirror. I didn't look long enough to be sure. Looking felt like giving him more of me than he'd already taken. A few hundred yards down, under the next street light, something pale sat on the curb. At first, my brain refused it. I thought it was trash, a bag, a box. Then my headlights hit it clean and I saw the edges. A thick envelope, rubber banded shut, sitting upright like someone had set it there with care. Not blown by wind, not damp, just placed. I pulled over without thinking, then felt the jolt of fear that I'd broken the loop. But the time had already passed. 5:17 was done. The coin had been placed. The test had been graded. This was the part where the system returned the result. I climbed down into the drizzle, boots hitting wet pavement, and walked to the curb. The envelope was heavy when I picked it up. Real weight, not a promise. I didn't open it right there. I carried it back into the cab and shut the door, locking it out of habit. My hands shook when I slid the rubber band off. I pulled the flap open and looked inside. Stacks of bills, crisp and flat, like they'd never been in a wallet. Hundreds, 20s, clean paper, new ink. The kind of cash you only see in movies or in the hands of people who don't work for it the way I did. I counted twice because counting felt like control. 2,000. Exactly. No signature, no receipt, no name on anything, just money in an envelope sitting on a curb like it was normal. I sat there with it in my lap and felt my body try to catch up. My chest hurt from breathing too shallow for too long. My shoulders were tight. My fingers were numb from the cold and the tension. I stared at the cash until it stopped looking like a hallucination. Then I picked up my phone. Still no service. The screen lit my palm. I opened my bank app out of reflex and saw the same balance, the same number, the same 13 cents at the end. It didn't matter. Cash didn't need towers. Cash didn't need a broker to hit approve. Cash was blunt. Cash worked. I shoved the envelope under the seat, put the coin back in my pocket, and drove. By the time the sky started to gray at the edges, I was running on a different kind of fuel. Not sleep, not caffeine, just urgency. The roads looked more normal in daylight, like the city was putting its face back on. Cars appeared in lanes, people walked dogs, a bakery sign flicked on. The world acted like it hadn't spent the night trying to break me. I got to the clinic parking lot with rain still clinging to the truck and the clock in my head still stuck on 5:17. My hands shook when I walked inside. The building smelled like antiseptic and warm air vents and that thin, nervous sweetness hospitals always have. My shoes squeaked on the tile. Jessa was already there, sitting stiff in a plastic chair with a folder on her lap. She looked up when she saw me, and her expression changed fast, like she wanted to be mad and relieved at the same time and couldn't pick one. I didn't hug her. We weren't those people anymore. We were the kind of people who only touched when there was a kid between us. I walked to the desk with the envelope in my hand and asked where to pay. My voice came out rough. The receptionist didn't look surprised. She slid a form toward me, pointed at a line. I signed like my name was a life raft. When I laid the money down, the receptionist counted it with practiced speed. One stack, then the next, then a smaller one. Her face didn't change. She printed a receipt and stamped it like this was the most normal thing in the world. Jessa followed me into the hallway, her eyes locked on the paper in my hand. She waited until we were away from the desk, away from other ears. "Where did you get this?" Jessa asked. "Work," I said. It was the truth. It was also nothing like the truth. Jessa's jaw tightened. She lowered her voice and stepped closer, like she didn't want to make a scene. But she also didn't want to let it go. "Don't lie to me, Carter," she said quietly. I felt heat rise in my face. Not anger. Shame. The kind that comes from realizing you sound like every deadbeat story even when you're trying not to be one. I thought about telling her everything. The sprinter, the coin, the rules, the patrol lights that weren't a stop, Noah under the canopy, Sable under the streetlight, the envelope on the curb like a dropped tip. If I told her, she'd either think I'd lost my mind or she'd look at me like I was dangerous. Either way, it wouldn't help Eli. It wouldn't change the schedule. It would only spread the fear. So I kept it small. "I'm not," I said. Jessa stared at me for a long second, then looked down the hall toward the double doors that led to the back offices. Her shoulders sagged a little, the way they always did when she ran out of fight and had to settle for getting through the day. "Just don't do anything stupid," she said, softer. I nodded once. I didn't trust my mouth. Eli's appointment stayed on the books. The next week moved like a blur. Calls, forms, checklists, the kind of medical routine that makes your brain numb just so you can survive it. On surgery day, he went under and came back out, pale and groggy but alive. The doctor said the repair looked good. They said the next few months mattered. They said follow-ups. They said all the words that make you feel grateful and terrified at the same time. When Eli finally came home, he slept on the couch with his favorite blanket and woke up asking for cereal like nothing had happened. His laugh sounded thinner for a while, but it was still his laugh. He called me Rocket again one afternoon when I brought him water, and I flinched so hard I almost spilled it. After that, I tried to bury the night the way you bury anything that doesn't fit in daylight. I told myself it was done. The test had been passed, the money had been paid, the rules had gone quiet. No more texts, no more radio clicks, no more wrong minutes on the dash clock. For a little while, it almost worked. Then, a few nights later, I woke up in my bed at exactly 3:33, eyes snapping open like someone had flicked a switch in my skull. The house was quiet. Rain tapped the window in slow, familiar beats. Jessa wasn't there, of course. Eli was asleep down the hall. I lay still, listening for anything out of place, and told myself I was just stressed, just a dad with a brain that wouldn't shut off. Then the sound came from the driveway. A faint click. Not outside, not from the street, from my truck. I was parked out front because I hadn't bothered to move it since the clinic. I'd been too tired, too numb, too convinced that avoiding it would keep it from looking back. The click came again, and I knew it instantly. The AM radio. I threw the blanket off and went to the window, heart hammering. The cab was dark, but there was a faint glow inside, that dull green-blue light of a radio screen turning on in an empty vehicle. Static filled the night, muffled through glass and distance, but clear enough that I could hear the shape of it. My stomach dropped the same way it had under the streetlight. Then the voice cut through, flat and procedural. "Carter Boone," the radio said flatly. I stood frozen at the window, barefoot on cold floor, staring at my own truck like it belonged to someone else now. "Your circulation window begins now," it said flatly. The radio clicked off. Silence rushed back in, thick and heavy. My pulse pounded in my ears. I forced myself to breathe, in through my nose, out through my mouth, slow. I looked down at my phone on the nightstand. No notifications, no missed calls, nothing. I opened my bank app anyway because my body didn't know how to stop checking. The balance loaded and my breath caught. The cents at the end were different. Not 13 anymore, 17 cents. I stared at it until my eyes burned. Then I turned away from the window and walked back to my bed like a man trying to act normal in his own life. I lay down under the blanket and listened to the quiet, waiting for knocking that didn't come. Because the worst part wasn't the radio turning on by itself. The worst part was how calm the message felt, not like a threat, like a reminder, like a schedule. I didn't get paid to make a delivery. I got paid to prove I'd come back.